Please feel comfortable to do so. So to start with the afternoon's agenda, I'd like to call on Henrique Uberri. He's a researcher from IPIE. Carlos Milani from the Scientific Panel on Information Integrity about Climate Science. Kate Sell, Senior Climate Campaign Manager at Union of Concerned Scientists. Cristiana Lucecan, Coordinator at Rede de Pesquisa Climatizando, Research Network. Claudio Angelo, he's International Policy Coordinator at the Climate Observatory.
Welcome, and thank you for being here. And I am very much honored to be a part of this very meaningful event. So my name is Ece Elbeyi, and I am a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Copenhagen, and I also serve as a consultant scientist at the International Panel for Information Integrity, for the panel on information integrity on climate change. So we are, in our work, we are like compiling a systematic literature review, a synthesis report based on a systematic literature review on both problems and solutions about information integrity around climate science. And one of the recurrent issues that we encounter and identify from the literature that intensified attacks towards scientists. And this panel is mainly on that topic. That is very important and crucial, both to protect the scientists, but also to maintain and sustain information integrity as well. So mainly these attacks are both in the form of personal intimidations and attacks, but also there are some insidious forms of attacks as well, like smear campaigns or personal attacks or conspiracy theories too. So therefore, understanding both the nature and the consequences of these attacks towards scientists are crucial to protect the scientists and information integrity as well. So I would like to begin with a broad question about your personal experiences and also reflections on this issue. So I want to ask you, how do these attacks on scientists manifest in, for instance, different contexts across political systems, regions, sectors, or media platforms? Do you observe some similarities or differences in the forms or intensity of these attacks, depending on the level of, for instance, democratic governance or the local information environment? Or I am very curious about to hear whether you observe gendered, racial, or ethnicity-based dynamics or differentials between these attacks. So this would be my first question, and we would, if you would like to, we can go one by one. And
Hello, thank you very much for inviting the question. I'm very honored to be here as a representative of the Union of Concerned Scientists, where we have been experiencing and documenting and trying to protect scientists from these sorts of attacks for a very long time. The first thing I would like to say is that this is part of what we call the disinformation playbook. We introduced this term in a peer-reviewed paper in 2017. And just to name the chief plays, first, to counterfeit science, so to create science that looks real but is not, Secondly, to harass climate scientists, all kinds of scientists, to manufacture doubt about science, to buy credibility through affiliations with academic institutions, professional societies, and finally, to manipulate government officials. Okay, now I think we can see from what we've already heard this morning, we know that the fossil fuel industry is manufacturing counterfeit science. We know that they are harassing scientists. We know that they have worked hard to manufacture doubt. And in fact, at this point in the United States, most people recognize that climate change is here, it's now, it's hurtful to us, it's caused by burning fossil fuels. What they don't know is the strength of the scientific consensus. Now, I myself, I'm not a scientist, but I myself and colleagues have experienced online threats, attacks, harms, yes, gendered. The attacks on women, including myself, do tend to be sexual or sort of sexual assault based. I want to just point out also that this playbook is one that was used by the tobacco industry. It is one that I'm confident is being used by the agribusiness sector. This is how you attack science when it's not on your side. Really briefly, I would just also say that this kind of disinformation, these tactics, is how the present US administration came into power, and that furthering the undermining of the entire US scientific enterprise is one means by which they hope to keep power. And we know from experiences in Germany, with fake biology that killed millions of people in famine. And we know from Brazil itself during the dictatorship. So this is what we see, this is what we are experiencing. Thank you.
Boa tarde a todos.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am a teacher and researcher at the Federal University of Espírito Santo, and I have been working with the mobilization and studies of collective action around socio-environmental rights in Brazil. And I can say that the issues that relate to threats and persecution of scientists are nothing new. So I'd like to invite you for a brief exercise of the imaginary. Imagine that during today's activity, at about 10 a.m., someone had come in, a man with weapons, stopping next to us and simply staying there the entire time, looking, perhaps taking photographs or recording. Then we went off to lunch, and that same person, imagine that he came along with us, but he didn't have lunch. He just stood there and watched what was happening. Now imagine a different situation in the same environment. Let's imagine that suddenly a police person comes in with the insignia and with a large weapon, and he stands here. These are situations that I have experienced in the field whilst I was working in ethnographic work in communities that suffer social environmental harm. Let us imagine that we are oceanographers or environmental engineers, and we have a research that aims to verify the pollution caused by an oil company on a river or in the ocean. And our research reaches the conclusion that there is indeed pollution, and that we can prove that it comes from an oil leak. At the time that we are about to introduce And to present that proof, someone calls us on the phone, and it's an official from the oil company, which is also a company that has the resources that also finances our research, and that happens. They are strongly financed by the pollutants themselves. And during this phone call, the person asks if we in fact wish to continue to present this data. It's a simple question. And then, concluding very briefly, at this first moment, I'd like to invite you to think on those examples that are real, that I personally have experienced and shared with colleagues. And I want to conclude by saying, I know who they are, who are the responsible companies for those kinds of situations that I just told you. But I couldn't tell you who they are, because if I were to tell you, I would be at risk of being sued, which is what happened with many scientists that quote, name the companies that pollute or cause climate impacts. So we can deepen into this, but these are some of the issues that we are facing. I'll keep going in Portuguese. My name is Carlos Milani. I am a professor of the State University, Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. And I am here representing the Climate Science Network. As we saw in the morning,
we saw many abuses and attacks to journalists of the communication to defend the coverage that are rigorous about the climate chaos. And we live that all the time. And activists as well. Activists to the right to land and territory that are attacked all the time. João has spoken about this in the morning, and that work for specific causes in Brazil is one of the has won the record of having this type of intervention. But the scientists working on this climate emergency, they are also attacked and threatened by their production of scientific evidence and the different areas. They can be guided or non-guided by the scientists, but their productions of evidence are put many times equally put with the opinion of bloggers and influencers. And I think it's very difficult on the point of view of the political point of view to have this equality made with scientific findings. They produce several articles, and it's very difficult to publish that. And a young blogger, a vlogger, an influencer, we have watched this process, and it's not particular from Brazil from 2019 to 2022. During the previous government of Jair Bolsonaro, that was anti-vaccine, anti-democratic, threatening the scientists' point of view, and it was the real life problem. There were attacks against scientists that were extremely important, Judy Butler and Andy, that were attacked in the airport, if I'm not mistaken. And in the case of our anthropologists, she was a victim of public hate and lynching, and there was a social protection to the defenders of rights, and she ended up leaving Brazil. So there were two other things that I wanted to mention that are a little bit distinct from the clear threat. One of the scientists with leaders that are authoritarian here in Brazil, there is a need for them to publish without their names. And for us scientists, that's really hard because when we publish, we get points in our CV. And that is important for our scientific levels work. So being anonymous sometimes is not a way, but we end up having to do that. In the previous years, we had to publish it this way. There is an institutional interruption of data for the formulation of public policies, both at a national level and the international level. We have followed that in Brazil, the interruption and the difficulty of the census and the also some other things that are fundamental for the production of intelligence and the public policies that are involved by different areas. And also another aspect that is really important and that affects the scientific world and the relationship of the scientific world to the societies, which is the frailness of the structures of participation, where scientists, next to other activists and members of the civil society, participate in terms of the formulation of public policies. Here in Brazil, there was a huge frailness of this participation, which affected the way that they were formulating the public policy. So in terms of analysis, there are some typologies that are really hard for us right now. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I think that I am the outlier of this panel because I'm not a scientist. I do not have any academic publication. If I to not say that I don't have anything, I wrote one paragraph of Leticia's article. So on the point of view of the defenders, and also I'm not a defender, but I work in an organization that is environmental type of company and that contains among its members defenders of the environment and people from the other government that were under threat. So I'm going to say two stories from our network that suffered in different areas of the Amazon region due to misinformation. One case, and they both happened in the Tapajós region in the state of Pará, which is the one that is going to host the next COP. We had a president, and that we can discuss here how misinformation became a species of identification of the extreme right. We can discuss why that happened. And this president in 2019, the Amazon region was burning due to the problematic of the president. And he said that who was putting fire in the Amazon region was the environmentalists and the indigenous people. I have a colleague that had his car burned in front of his house at 2 a.m. because he was denouncing the people that were actually burning the Amazon region, and the president insisted on that information, and in September or October of 2019, there was a king and of many policemen and 4 youth that were volunteers and that were trying to put out the fire in the Amazon region were put in jail because they were accused and they were harassed for being the ones that were putting fire. And this is what happened. So closing really quickly, my 10 seconds. This cases illustrate how in the combat of misinformation in places like Brazil, the United States, and so on, need to take a step back and to think about the strengthening of democracy, because this is all connected nowadays. And if we lose sight of that and start seeing that that is just a matter of taking the right information to people, we are going to have the entire world transformed in a huge Washington, D.C. So I think my time is up. We can continue afterwards.
It's very sad to hear these unfortunate experiences, of course, but it's clear that there are like numerous ways and a means at play to discredit, delegitimize, and harm and attack scientists. But my second question would be that actually, these are two interlinked questions, but looking back, what do you think have been some of the key mistakes or shortcomings, both on the parts of the scientists and also the institutions they are affiliated with when it comes to responding to these attacks? And based on these lessons learned, maybe we can take them as lessons learned. That what kinds of solutions and strategies do you envision for addressing these attacks more effectively in the future, both to protect scientists and also protect the information integrity and environment?
Thank you. It's a good question. I think it really depends on where you are and the category of threat that you face. If you are subject to online harassment, for example, then there's a series of steps that one can take to increase one's online security. Yeah. But if you're threatened in your very work, in your life, then there's an entirely different set of steps that one must take. And I suppose the other thing I would say is that when it's the first, when you are being attacked as a scientist, but not physically, okay, when you're being defamed, please sue. Okay, there's a famous climate scientist named Michael Mann, who's closely affiliated with the Union of Concerned Scientists. He and our board member, Ben Santa, were both part of a hack that happened in England against the University of East Anglia's research unit and associated researchers all over the world. Well, the hackers cherry-picked from those emails to malign and defame some of the leading climate researchers in the world. Ben had a dead rat left on his doorstep. Okay, Mike was accused of torturing data the way that a famous sexual abuser of children tortured children. This was the claim, and he took them to court, and he won $1 million. So I think all down the line, when we are up against people who would do us harm, don't forget to sue. We are suing the fossil fuel companies all over the world for harm and for deception, harm, damages, and disinformation. And I think we need to take the fight to the liars and the people who would harm science, climate action, and democracy itself.
Bom, obrigada pela pergunta.
Thank you so much for your question. So many things to say. I'm going to take a deep breath and going to accelerate. So I think it's really important for us to think that when we are threatened, and here we can think as scientists and technical environmentalists, and we need to include journalists or people that are defending their territory. We are doing something that is relevant. I like to think this way. And the objective of the threat usually is to cause this harassment, this problem, and the objective that they have is to stop us from talking. In very limitrof type of leading to death or any other type of actions, I think that on that behalf specifically regarding the scientists, what is really important is that we consider that there are many threats that are not noticed as threats. And it seems like we are always living in a situation of harassment that has differences according to the territories, to the social environmental issues of each particular case. And João has pointed out earlier that here in Brazil it's really difficult for us to separate threats and related to climate change. There are almost always conflicts of social environmental nature, and they are interconnected. And I have been following that for decades. The impacts related to oil, they are considered now as climate issues, but this existed before. And I think that there's a series of issues here that we need to take into account to characterize what is a threat and when it involves an issue of climate information integrity. What I would like to say is that all of these actors have in common is the production of something, of a denouncement or of something that is going against the science, like the experience that they live in the territory, the technique within the bureaucracy of a state, and so on, or the point of view of the communication. But that is the information. And I think that we need to understand how that information in the context of a climate discussion ends up interfering in the businesses of these great actors that are causing this climate impact, is when we are going to be able to characterize this threat better for in context of climate change. I wasn't able to respond to the question, but I hope that we can solve this soon.
Very quickly, we did two things at the Climate Observatory to try and give that answer that you were asking about. Firstly, Brazil is it's kind of an extraordinary country for a series of historical movements. We have a civil society that's quite strong. The environmentalist movement in Brazil is extremely strong and diversified. So when our members were silenced and under threat, and there's awful stories. Three anthropologists from an organization that I won't mention were doing field work in a city in the south of Pará, and I won't mention the name of the city either, and they found 3 bullets in the hotel reception where they were inside an envelope saying, "How about you leave?" So in that case, as an organization, as an umbrella organization, at the secretariat of the network, we started going above the government as a way to react, but also to protect our members that couldn't speak up for a series of reasons. There were people in the field, there were people at risk. And we are very criticized for that. We were criticized last government by saying that we were very aggressive. How about we try to engage with the government, try to talk to people? At the end of the day, it's the government elect. There was a lot of that. But we didn't give up. We are very consistent in knocking on Mr. B's door, and I won't mention his name, and it ended up being the right strategy to deal with the far right government at the time. So we created a platform, a fact checking platform specifically for environmental discourse of the government. When you have a government that uses lie as a way to exercise power, it's good to and we were never under the illusion that this platform called Facebook.eco were would make these people stop lying. That was never the aim. The aim was to create a repository for debunking lies so that the press and other actors that are not very familiar with environmental discourse would know precisely what the Ministry of the Environment was talking about when they said that, for example, this is what John was saying, that people deforest because they're poor. That was one of the things that we had already debunked by providing academic reasoning and proofs, but not to influence the government, to influence those that were in touch with that government discourse and inoculate against that. We want to believe that that was important to um, to not give strength to that kind of narrative. And I think it was important that many organizations became part of our network because they saw that there was a place there for them to be a part of something to help weaken the government narratives. I spoke too much. I think we've already said quite a bit about possible solutions, no matter how modest they might be, because I think the ability of collectives and scientists such as the Climate Observatory to produce answers that are at the level of the threats when we have authoritarian governments or leadership, as we saw here in Brazil. It's actually we can do something, but at a smaller scale. So we have to think about something institutional as well. Minister Paulo Sergio was here, and I think the judicial branch has an important role. This is an important moment in these moments of weakness of democracy, but that depends a lot from context to context. In the case of Brazil, we have scientific institutions that are relatively strong, the CNPq and others. We have partnerships for anthropology, the Brazilian Association of Sociology, Political Science, and other collectives for health, for the environment. There's a series of institutional spaces, scientific collectives that could also be agents and will not sort of repair, but will be able to welcome or care for those scientists that are under threat and whose rights are being violated. There is no integrity of scientific information without scientists. This is something we need to understand, no matter how critical we might be. And I have a lot of self-criticism of the scientific world that sometimes doesn't think radically enough or broadly enough, that we need to communicate well beyond the scientific walls, but still there is no integrity of climate or environmental information without the action, the activity of the scientists themselves. There is another aspect that I think is important, which is the different kinds of solidarity. Here in Brazil, we had this during the last 4 years, between 19 and 23. Solidarity among scientists in the national but also international sphere. Many international centers, some with a lot more financial capability than research centers here, welcomed, supported, became partners of the scientists here at a more weakened time in our history in Brazil. And finally, I think there is another dimension of the institutional and political framework that also protected us, which is the fact that we are a federation full of fragility, but the fact that we are a federal state allowed us sometimes to be welcomed into or to be supported by state organizations. And some states, in some states it's better than others, but in some states the state universities or the research support organizations developed an important role on the production of content on social environmental issues to try and be a palliative of the lack of funding. And just a last message. We believe that COP30 will need to consider this issue of threats to scientists, also to a threat to democracy itself, and to the formulation of public policies that are based in science, in evidence, produced by social, natural, and other sciences. So it's important that this umbrella of integrity of information also has at the heart the integrity, the physical integrity of those who are the producers of content in our sphere. More
Mechanisms that you have in Brazil to protect scientists, and I think there are like many examples and lessons for other geographies that can take from you too. It's great. Thank you so much. We can open the floor for a questions and answer session. There are some questions.
Hi, thank you so much for an incredibly moving discussion. My question is, as climate scientists increasingly face political pushback, online harassment, and threats to undermine their work, what role should the broader climate science community, including institutions, senior researchers, and professional societies, play in proactively supporting and protecting individual scientists? Are we doing enough, and where are the blind spots?
Yeah, this is a particularly vexed question for someone who lives in the United States at the moment, where we are seeing just this wholesale attack on the scientific enterprise. And I would just like to connect this with the information integrity challenge, because one of the biggest drivers of this destruction is also one of the biggest polluters of the information ecosystem. Elon Musk is a significantly, perhaps uniquely powerful person in the history of the world. With all this money, with all this access, with all this ability, apparently, to ignore the rule of law so far in the United States. And so things that are protective, I think, include the tremendous international solidarity that we see. The more that we can make clear that the US is behaving as a rogue nation, the US needs to be an international pariah, honestly, from its actions against scientists as well as its actions against immigrants, against all sorts of people, against fundamental human rights. Another thing that I should like to say that's protective is offering opportunities for collaboration that don't solely rely on US government funding, because that is being slashed at the government center, research center, as well as university research processes as well. And then I suppose the last thing, there's a few things that I should like everyone who's concerned about climate science, climate impacts, climate action, solutions to do. One is open the playbook. We know what their tactics are. Point them out. It's just like if you really want to irritate a magician, say, oh, but he just had it up his sleeve and then he palmed it. Okay, show the tactic, show the manufactured science, show the lies. Another is, I think, it's very sad to say this as a representative of the Union of Concerned Scientists, but if science were going to win this fight, we would have won it already. The scientists have been clear, the scientists have been informative, the scientists have learnt to be extremely powerful communicators, okay? But they are a small group of actors within a richly funded sphere, and I think Jake and Charlotte and others today have spoken powerfully about the economics of the disinformation ecosystem. And then a few other things. I've heard people talk about the importance of messages and speaking to people where they are. I think messengers are just as important as messages. Who you trust, who you're talking to, okay? And do you think that they're likely to give you good information? And then the last thing I will say is that I think in addition to doing a really good job of showing us our present and our future, scientists have done a remarkable job in bringing this down to, in some cases, literally the level of your house. My team can tell you, if you live along the US coastline, when sea level rise is likely to put your house in jeopardy. Okay, my team can tell you for your city when heat is likely to reach the point where it is not safe to work or play or be outside for much of the year. This was not the case when I joined. We have done such a good job of localizing data now, and we need to give that information to people through trusted messengers to say, look, let's talk about what you value. Let's talk about where you live. Let's talk about who you love. Thank you.
Hi. Is there a space for another question? Yes? Okay, so Kate, my question is a little of what you were just saying. To expand a little bit, I would like you to tell us how scientists in the US are resisting the wave of threats and defamation and everything, and the wave of anti-science that we are seeing taking roots in the White House right now. And to Professor Milani, what do you see that scientists in Brazil had as an experience during the Bolsonaro years that maybe our counterparts or your counterparts in the US could learn from? And is it the way to judicialize things? How are researchers resisting right now? Thank you.
Ok, eu vou falar em português.
I'm going to speak in Portuguese. Meg, you have asked the question in English and you have induced me to do it in Portuguese. So there are two contexts that are very comparable, the Brazilian and the American states, their federations, they can be more stronger than Brazil, but it would be really hard for us to imagine having this transfer. But one of the points that I have presented here in terms of institutional support, the strengthening of the support from the scientific levels that are stronger than here. We look for diversification of funds because there are no funds for these type of researches anymore. We look for philanthropy as well and different topics here. And the Institute Climate and Society and the creation of the Observatory of Climate Change and the public agencies that fund the scientific topics. It would be hard for us to imagine. I wouldn't have the answer in terms of dimension. So there is a lot of judicialization as well. So those are phenomena that we can discuss. They start happening there before they come here. that are not related to the scientific world. But going back to the question that was formulated before about if these institutions are doing their part, like Kate said, that's something exceptional. It's a work that is wonderful, but I think that that is not the rule of the scientific world. And in this case, they do not protect the scientists really well. And this has to do with the political level, not only in Brazil, but frequently we value this production individually, and we have difficulty in praising the collective type of we don't give prestige collectively, just individually, and this generates several discussions and the frailness of the institutions, because one more time they go back to the same problem, and many times this is related to the individual production. So we need to start valuing what we do in a more collective way, and not only individually but quantitatively as well.
Yes, thank you very much for that, Carlos. I would say that the strongest approach for protecting scientists and science is just the same as the strongest approach for countering disinformation, which is don't silo it. Okay, don't think you've got a problem with science here and you've got a problem with immigration here and you've got a problem with workers' rights here. No, it has to be intersectional. There is no other path because no one group has the power. We need all the power from the people to fight back against what we are currently facing and threatened with. And I really strongly believe we must do that in the disinformation space, because if you don't, this is what you end up in the real world with, right? And so I really encourage us all to think about how we can fight together with allies, whether it's about disinformation, whether it's about climate progress, or whether it's about the fundamental protection of democratic systems and a life-sustaining planet. Thank you.
Posso? May I? I don't know if anybody is going to answer now. Bom, boa tarde, meu nome é Bia Barbosa.
Good afternoon, my name is Bia Barbosa. I am from the Science Without Frontiers, and I have I'm in the journalism faculty, and you've talked about this program of protection for the communicators of human rights, and in here for the environmentalists, this is a way of thinking. So we have several mechanisms of protection in the region in Latin America, and they are really frail. And for us, it's really clear that one of the strategies of protection to the journalists and so on, and the defenders, this is the third point as well, is for us to guarantee conditions. So we need to maintain this as much as possible. The journalism that is more processed, that is frail and so on, is the independent journal and communitary, indigenous. And the journalists that are being criminalized are indigenous journalists that are denouncing the work of big companies in their territory. And in here in Brazil, it's the same thing. So I would like to hear a little bit from you on ways out in terms of sustainability that goes beyond the protection, because we need to protect, but at the same time, we need to guarantee that it doesn't reach the point that the protection is necessary. We need to predict that and to keep that from happening through fostering policies of sustainability of the press for us to have a sustainable and diverse system. And I think that a lot that Kate brought in terms of the challenges of the scientific independence and who pays for the research also happens when you don't have this independence to produce content and you don't have sustainability in the means of communication to be able to show these crimes and to publish what is being done. I would like for you to comment a little bit about this. Can I take advantage and to say something that is related to that? I would just like to remind you that we also have an entire new market of communicators, of influencers that put their faces out there, and they're really important because they do not count with any protection and they don't even know how to defend themselves. Just to put the influencers both in this package as well. Okay, so this problem of programs, of protection, I think that we need to face this. This is a very important and serious discussion. I've been following some defenders that are part of this program. And what I have talked to them about is that definitively there is no way for the state to be in the role of protection when many times it's the state itself that needs to do it. So there's a whole contradiction. The federal police many times is going to protect a defender, but at the same time, the federative entity that is provoking that. So there are very serious issues, and in practice, what we have been observing is that the best ways to protect our networks that constitute themselves among the defenders outside of the bubble. So, for example, if there is an armed force that is live filming everything, sometimes this has a greater way of protecting that person than calling the police. So they are caught on tape. So these networks that we have been seeing and within this defenders that are very much attacked, and the scientists and the communicators and the technicians, I think the construction of this network is what I would invest most if I could bet on something. And the funding for that, also remembering that I know that you have already talked about this, is one of the points that is most debated in the protection for human rights, which is the fact that the program starts with a basic error, which is to remove that defender from his fight. When they are removed from their territory and isolated, we know that that is not the way to go, because for those who are producing a threat, that is exactly what they want. So if we remove this person from the fight, we're going to say that this measurement was effective in the point of view for those who produce a threat. So we need to guarantee the security of this person, and this has to do with financial sustainability, but at the same time, alternative ways of fighting. And I know that the role of the communicators in general, each one of them, journalists and influencers and so on, in a different position, they have something fundamental, which is to guarantee visibility. And this is something that is really important. In the point of view of science, the decredibilization, we've talked about the scientific work and that this is one of the tactics that are used for us to count on support for spreading the word and to have some sort of certification of what we are producing for the public opinion as being something important. I think that on the point of view of the defenders, they're the ones that are going to talk about that in the next panel. But I have followed that as something fundamental too. And I've seen many defenders that have been making decisions of leaving the program of protection of the state and assuming more visibility, even looking for this help with agencies of journalism and communicators. And I think that there's still a lot to advance. People have spoken about this in the morning, about the needs that we have to dominate the tools of communication. That's why I think these networks are very important, because we do not have any domain in that. We have a lot of difficulty. We see the presentation of someone that was graduated in journalism, and there are different ways of educating people. And just concluding, I would just like to say that I agree with Milani. I think that the scientific organizations, they need to advance a lot in this. And in Brazil, we almost don't have them, only in social science studies. It's very rare to see any manifestations, any demonstrations to follow what is happening in the science, in the Brazilian science.
Our time's up, so we have to close up. But we will have plenty of opportunities to continue conversation. Thank you so much for your very important contribution, and thank you very much too.
Continuing on, I would like to invite to the panel Advertising and Accountability, turning ads and advertising industry into allies in support of information integrity. I would like to call to the stage Humberto Ribeiro, co-founder and legal research director of Sleeping Giants Brazil. He's going to be the facilitator. Duncan Meisel, Executive Director of Clean Creatives. Harry Kingayabai, Co-Chair of Conscious Advertising Network, CAN. Adit Hamesh, Policy Manager of Check My Ads. Charlotte Scadden, Senior Advisor on Information Integrity of United Nations. Amir Malik, Managing Director of Digital Transformation, Alvarez and Marcel.
Boa tarde a todas as.
Good afternoon, everyone. How do announcers and digital platforms of ads in particular can be allies in the promotion of integrity of climate information, or obstacles, on the other hand, for global challenges on the issue of disinformation? With a gross income of $1 trillion in 2019 and responding for more than 80% of Google's revenue, the advertising market, the digital advertising market, offers opportunities and challenges for the issue of information integrity globally. On this panel, we will deal with the power and the responsibility that is needed for the advertising market, how this could be an obstacle for information integrity, how transparency and accountability and frameworks of promotion for social responsibility are necessary to face this issue, and how consumers, announcers, ad platforms, policymakers, and the civil society could collaborate to create an ad network that is more sustainable and more responsible.
Other discussions, I will keep in mind a main question. How can advertising industry be held accountable for the role it plays in amplifying false narratives, and what ethical frameworks should be adopted to ensure responsible advertising practices? And I suggest we start with Harriet and Aditi, and I will ask you both to give a quick overview of how advertising is associated with information integrity challenges and the implications of these to advertisers and consumers. So please, Harriet and then Aditi.
Helps if I use one of these, doesn't it? Thank you, great question. So I just want to kick off by saying that I will be answering for myself and also incorporating comments from Amir Malik, from Alvarez and Marcel, who unfortunately couldn't be with us today. So in fact, information integrity around climate change is good business. We've heard a lot today about how business can be obstructionist and get in the way. But I would draw your attention to quite a few things that have happened recently. So I didn't always work in advertising. I started out in corporate social responsibility. And there we worked with brands like, I don't know, kind of large coffee brands, large chocolate brands, large insurance brands, all of whom have very, very strong climate and sustainability strategies. And they do that because their bottom line depends on us sorting this out. So Jake talked earlier on about the increase in coffee prices, increase in cocoa prices. We've seen insurance companies and sectors losing lots of money, to the point where business actually wrote to the European Union quite recently. 11 large businesses wrote to the European Union and said, we want to strengthen sustainability regulation, which was in danger of being watered down. And if we look at the numbers, sorting out climate change is good for business. So not only in terms of kind of raw materials, but also in terms of impacts to shock. So when there's a lot of disinformation out there, it increases things like polarization, increases the chance that there's going to be protests. And in fact, the World Bank found that for a year and a half after kind of large-scale protests, GDP in a country sinks by 1.5%. It's still depressed after a year and a half. Not only that, but actually advertising next to disinformation renders it less effective. Consumers do not trust brands that appear to endorse, fund disinformation around key issues. So it is good business to sort this out. The issue that I think a lot of advertisers have is that their supply chains for placing these adverts are incredibly opaque. There are lots of middlemen there. There's lots of opacity, and basically they just don't understand. They can't get a handle on where their advertising is going. But when they do, and they see where the wastage is, where the fraud is, where they're funding disinformation, then they can start to take action. And we've seen fantastic examples of advertisers doing that. So I'd really urge everyone to see the advertising industry as potential allies in this problem. And I think the reason for this is that actually if we tackle these incentives for the production and dissemination of advertising that is counter to climate action, of information that is counter to climate action, that obfuscates, then actually we can get disinformation out of the system. We will have less disinformation in the system if we sort out the incentives for it. And that will mean that media literacy, that fact-checking doesn't have to work as hard. That will mean we have less polluted information ecosystems. And for me, that's really powerful.
I'm from Los Angeles, and earlier this January, we saw fires burn through over 45,000 acres of the city. And along with this, we saw several misinformation narratives about why the fires started, the failures of the fire department, California water policy, and a lot of the reason why this misinformation was spreading so quickly and gaining legitimacy is in large part due to the digital advertising industry. Like Harriet just mentioned, digital advertising is a complex and very opaque supply chain. It used to be that an advertiser would work directly with a publisher or a website and place their ad. Now they rely on middlemen to do it for them. And advertising is bought and sold online instantaneously in real time, and with the involvement of several ad tech companies. And these middlemen have an extreme amount of control over the money, ads, data, and there are big tech companies like Google that have monopolized parts of this industry and own multiple parts of the supply chain. This leads to two main issues for our information ecosystem. One, like Harriet mentioned, is a transparency issue. Advertisers don't know where their ad dollars are ending up and inadvertently are funding climate misinformation. And the second is that it also defunds reliable journalism. In the US, for example, for every $2.16 that's intended to be sent to a legitimate organization, $1 of that gets sent to misinformation. And so reliable reporting, reliable journalism is being defunded in this process. And this has also led to a decline in the news industry that was mentioned earlier today. And I also want to illustrate how the monetization of climate disinformation creates chaos for our information ecosystem. So let's say you see an ad for a major beverage company on a site that's peddling climate disinformation. Ads from reputable brands are ending up on sites that fund climate disinformation when they have explicitly said that they don't want to be there. And so this creates secondary problems for advertisers and for consumers. The placement of an ad from a reputable brand legitimizes disinformation claims. And if you read an article that's hateful or contains misinformation, it often has information effects on consumer trust and perception and brand perception. And this is really why brands and advertisers should also be paying attention to where their ads are ending up.
Fantastic. So, Charlotte, last year, the United Nations launched the Global Principles for Information Integrity, and you were directly involved in shaping them. Could you tell us a bit about what they are about? And are there any specific takeaways to advertisers? And how can they play a role in the supporting climate information integrity?
Thanks so much. And actually, just before I start, I want to just salute the previous panelists because I think that was a really powerful discussion and a really good reminder of why we're all here, actually, and why they're very much on the front lines of the fight for information integrity. And yeah, but this is exactly why we need to find ways to act, right, and act together. And the global principles were indeed, launched by the Secretary General in June, and really, it's the UN's framework for action to strengthen our information ecosystem, to make it safer, more humane, and it's a broad policy document. I encourage everyone to read it if you have time. But it really has recommendations for stakeholders across the ecosystem. You know, of course, governments. Media, civil society, yes, the tech companies. But as we were going about developing this framework, we really were keen to actually make sure there were very actionable points in there, right? Understanding that these were recommendations and, you know, they could very easily fall on deaf ears when it comes to big tech, for instance. So we did, and it's really the first time the UN has actually put forward recommendations specifically aimed at advertisers related to ad tech and the programmatic targeted advertising, and I think it's actually been really interesting because that part, that section, that principle on healthy incentives, we called it, is probably the one that I think has got most of biggest reaction. I think partly because it's new, and also because I think we were directly calling out the business model of big tech. But also really highlighting an area where we were asking advertisers and others to step up. And so it was an education for me, I will be honest, right? The ad tech supply chain is not something I knew much about when we started this process. And I really thank our civil society friends they do such a good job of taking what is very complicated and opaque issue and making it understandable to people. But yeah, we have very specific recommendations for advertisers. Pretty basic when you think about it. I mean, really we're asking them to take to do human rights responsible advertising. And what does that mean? That means at the very basic level, don't fund disinformation and hate, right? Make sure that your advertising is not, increasing risks in the ecosystem. Demand transparency and demand data. As we just heard, half of these advertisers don't know where their ads are even ending up, and that is a risk for their brand and has so many consequences. So at the basic level, just know where your ads are going, know where your ad dollars are going. And we have very specific recommendations around obligating ad tech to adopt transparency standards, for instance, and third-party audits. But really fundamentally, it's a transparency issue, and it's about demanding that knowledge and that information if you're an advertiser. And I just want to say that, it's really been a journey learning about this particular area. And I have found that when I start explaining to people, these big brands, they don't know where their ad dollars are going. I mean, we're talking, thousands, millions, hundreds of millions, right? People can't believe it. They're like, no, surely the big advertisers would never just throw their money into, a pit and not know where their ads are even ending up or how effective their ad campaigns are. And yet here we are. So, I think there is in that a real opportunity, and I really liked how you put it, Harriet, that we need to see advertisers as allies, because they are, and they have extreme power in this information ecosystem where, there really is a huge power imbalance.
Perfect. So, and Duncan, how can advertising industry be held accountable? And specifically, sometimes the problem is that climate disinformation gets funded, knowing or not, by advertisers. But other times, the issue is the intentional use of media, ad agencies, and PR professionals and strategies to create and spread disinformation. How are you addressing these at Clean Creatives, and how can advertising professionals themselves can be a part of this change?
Thank you so much. I'm the executive director of Clean Creatives, which is a global network of advertising and PR professionals who are trying to cut ties with fossil fuel polluters. We have over 1,300 agencies that have taken our pledge to not work with fossil fuels. They're in over 60 countries. And the reason that we started this campaign is because disinformation is not new. The oil and gas industry knew about climate change in the 1960s and the 1970s. They knew that their products are harming people and that they're harming the planet, and it was an existential threat to their business. But instead of responding to that with proactive measures to change the way they work, they lied. And specifically what they did is they hired advertising and PR agencies to lie on their behalf. It's not the CEO of the company writing the press release. It's an agency that they've hired from Edelman or Hill & Knowlton or something like that actually does the work of spreading the disinformation. And from this, pretty much every single misleading message that's ever been said about climate change has its origins in an advertising and PR professional sitting down and working with the polluter. Now, we did hear some stuff today about Madonna dancing, maybe causing some floods. So that may not have come from a PR professional, but for the most part, the history of this issue is that those messages do come from agencies. And so what we asked to do is to stop working with them, very simply. We don't think that advertising and PR companies should be working with companies that have told investors, that have told regulators that they plan to destroy the planet. With companies that knowingly sell a product they understand to be dangerous. And it's very important for civil society organizations, for governments, for brands to also stop working with the agencies that are doing this misinformation on behalf of polluters. So there's a great example of this where a brand in the United States that was selling tea wanted to do a project focused on environmental justice because they saw environmental justice and climate change as a threat or as an issue for their brand. And so they hired an agency, Edelman, to work with them to plant trees in communities that were being affected by pollution from oil refineries. And this was actually in a lot of ways a very good campaign. If your brands are going to do environmental activism, this is the kind of thing they should do. They should support communities who are on the front lines. But at the same time, Edelman was working with the American fuel and petrochemical manufacturers, which represents The refineries that were doing the pollution in the communities where Edelman was also planting trees. So there are these conflicts of interest that run through the advertising and PR industry. And if you hire an agency that has a polluting client like that, you are helping them do their job better on behalf of polluters. You are helping them greenwash. So the thing that we do at Clean Creatives is we ask professionals in the advertising and PR industry to take a pledge to not work with fossil fuels. And we ask nonprofits, brands, any kind of organization to sign a pledge that says we won't hire agencies that have fossil fuel clients. And fortunately, there's over 1,300 agencies now around the world that work in media, in PR, in creative, in branding, any advertising service you can imagine that are fossil free. And we're happy to support people in making that transition. So that's the shift that we're trying to initiate within the ad industry to try to disconnect this group of very intelligent, very capable people who do advertising from the pollution disinformation machine.
And Aditi, early you have, and also Harriet mentioned, and also Charlotte mentioned the need for advertisers to demand more transparency from ad platforms. What exactly does that transparency look like? And why it is so important in this discussion? Are there any existing examples or experiences we can look to? And how do we get there? Is regulation the only path, or we can find another ways to get there,
So transparency is really crucial for advertisers to understand exactly where their ad dollars are ending up. Like I mentioned, oftentimes advertisers don't have any visibility if their ads are being placed next to hateful content, next to health misinformation, next to climate misinformation. And so in order for them to really get an understanding of whether their ad spend is being utilized in the ways that they intend to, they need placement data or log level data to get a full picture of how their ads are being spent. And so we really advocate for this, and also you mentioned drawing from other examples. We advocate for this because there are common sense regulations for transparency, for accountability that exist in global financial markets, that exist in other complex supply chains, industries like the automated industry, that do have these regulations in place. And so we advocate for transparency. We also believe that advertisers need to know exactly who their middlemen are working with, where these businesses are located, what fees they take. Are they working with data brokers that are selling your personal information? Are they working with websites that are funding climate disinformation? And so we believe that having more visibility both into the data and where exactly these middlemen who exactly these middlemen are doing business with will give them more agency and more visibility into the supply chain.
And Harriet, at Conscious Advertising Network, you have developed principles that should guide agencies and advertisers in management of their ads, including sustainability issues. How has the market received these guidelines? And how can we convince advertisers, both in public and private sectors, to adopting these criteria will not harm the success of that campaigns? I'm asking that because in Brazil, we have encountered challenges, even when we are dealing with government. The government in Brazil decided, it's hard sometimes to convince the government to adopt such good practices when they develop the media campaigns, because professionals involved in conducting government advertising campaigns believe that adopting these kinds of criteria will imply in a reduction of the success of the strategy. So how advertisers can be convinced, and how can we show to them that if they are not part of the problem, part of the solution, they are part of the problem,
Brilliant, great question. So the Conscious Advertising Network launched 7 years ago, and we have a mission to ensure that advertising works for everyone. and that means respecting human rights, respecting sustainability, but also that advertising should be effective. And we have over 190 members, some of which are global, and they consist of the world's biggest brands, the world's biggest advertising agencies, and civil society groups as well. And this is huge. So this is not a fringe movement. This is a major mainstream movement within advertising. And what we've done, we talked a little bit yesterday about the need for translators, for us to take concepts from one sector to another. So what we've been doing over these 7 years is we've been making the business case for doing things properly. So if you think about what we've discussed, if advertisers understand what's in their supply chain, they can immediately take steps to improve it. So they can reduce waste, they can reduce fraud, they can make sure that their advertising is appearing in places that they actually choose. They can make sure that they're appealing to all of their customers and not just a small segment. So it's simple supply chain management. We've created guidelines. So tomorrow we will be launching something called our guiding principles. And what we've done is we've taken the great work that the UN has done around information integrity, and we've translated it for advertisers. And we've helped them to understand the steps that they can take with their agencies in order to embed these things within industry. And this kind of simple guidance, this kind of clear guidance is what is needed. We need to understand how to talk the language of these sectors we want to change, and we need to present that to them. And the reason that we have such an incredible mainstream movement is because people are seeing business results. Jake talked in an earlier panel about an advertiser who had kind of made sure that they understood exactly where their advertising was going, and as a result, they were selling more. I mean, what more can you want in terms of making a case to business? So essentially, when we do that, it's not just, I think we've heard again and again the moral and the environmental and the social case for doing this, but also it makes sense. And so I think over 7 years, we are so pleased with how it's grown. However, we do still need regulation to help us. Our members are telling us that they cannot get the transparency data that they need. There is a growing movement towards that. We have trade groups in the UK who are advocating for know your customer rules. We've got organizations who kind of verify where ads are going, who are like Double Verify, and Amazon, who are looking at kind of providing that data. But we need help from legislators to make sure that actually we can genuinely get that transparency so advertisers can act in a way that helps them and helps us.
And Charlotte, in the United Nations Global Principles for Information Integrity, you have built a multi-stakeholder approach to addressing the issue of information integrity. An important role is assigned to governments and another to advertisers. What should we promote or demand from governments, from legislators, and for advertisers and ad techs? Dealing with this situation that I mentioned, the difficulty to guide the government to adopt some issues in Brazil also. And what can we expect from the United Nations? How can the United Nations help us in this issue?
Well, I think first of all, how we can help is partly by what we've already done, right? By recognizing this as a key element of information integrity and putting forward very specific recommendations and, in our global principles. I think you mentioned coalition, and I think that's for us absolutely key. I mean, I am not an expert in advertising, as I've mentioned before. This has been an education for me. And as you can imagine, at the UN, that's not kind of what we focus on, but what we can bring is highlighting the potential harms and, in fact, the real life harms that happen on a global scale because of this ecosystem, right? And because of this supply chain. And then we have our excellent civil society colleagues here who can be a bridge to the advertising world for us, who speak an entirely different language to the language of international organizations and diplomacy, so that we can kind of connect those two, so that we're highlighting not only the harms, but as Harriet and others have really eloquently explained, the fact that this isn't just that it's the right thing to do, which it absolutely is, it is the profitable thing to do, right? So I think those two sides are really powerful, and you know, we all have something to bring there. And on climate specifically, one thing I wanted to highlight actually, related to Duncan's work, is in addition to launching the Global Principles last year, the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, also called for a global ban on fossil fuel advertising. He called for a ban on fossil fuel advertising with governments, with countries, with media outlets, tech companies, which, you know, I've come to realize are in fact advertising companies, but, you know, big tech companies. And he called on the advertising industry, the PR industry, to stop taking fossil fuel clients. Now, you know, that's, I think, the first time a UN Secretary General has made such a call, and I think it reflects his commitment to both information integrity and strong commitment to climate action. And it's really a recognition of the extent to which these players can contribute to undermining climate action and become, you know, enablers, right, of climate denial and obstruction. So that's a very concrete call that we have put out at the UN. And perhaps Duncan and others can tell us how that landed with the industry. But yeah, that's really how we see our role. And, you know, as I mentioned, it is a collective effort, right? And we all have a different voice to bring.
Yeah, Duncan, maybe you can tell us a little bit more. And how can PR firms use the relationships with climate-focused organizations to enhance their greenwashing strategies and mislead the public? How should civil society organizations respond to the challenge? And what strategies can be implemented to empower consumers and advertisers to identify and address disinformation? And how can collaboration be fostered to create a more sustainable information ecosystem?
So the most important thing to remember about this conversation about the role of fossil fuel companies is a very simple phrase, which is fossil fuel companies lie about everything. Absolutely everything. They lie about the impact of their products. They lie about their plans to fix it. They lie about climate change. And I think that's the thing that we need to keep repeating. And I think that understanding is something that has to be at the center of the civil society strategy. And it's very hard to explain. It's a very simple idea, but it's very hard to imagine that there are people who understood the scope of the climate crisis and chose to do nothing. It's not, if you say, no, they actually know their products are bad. I say this to my friends, and their immediate reaction is like, how could anyone do this? How could anyone endanger all life on Earth in this way? And so we just have to keep repeating it until it sinks in, because they have a very powerful message machine behind them. And greenwashing works. Greenwashing works. And so what we do at Clean Creatives is, first, we encourage brands to recognize the conflict of interest. So State Farm is one of America's biggest advertisers. They're an insurance company. They had an opportunity to buy an ad during the Super Bowl, the football game, US football game. And they had to cancel that advertisement because so many of their homes had burned down. So many of the homes that they insure had burned down in the California wildfires, which were caused by climate change. And there are brands across, you know, food and beverage, we've talked about them. We need those companies to recognize this as a conflict of interest. That if they are working with agencies that are helping burn down their client or burn down their customers' homes, you're on the wrong side and you can't work together anymore. Second, I really encourage people to listen to the talent in the industry. We're talking about how the UN Secretary General's call landed. I would say with the CEOs making the decision, it landed very poorly. They like making money. I think for everybody below them, it resonated very strongly. I think there are lots of young people in particular in the ad industry who recognize this is an issue because it's personal to them. And they're the people who make the TikToks. They're the people who know the social trends. It's not the old white guys at the top. It's the young people who understand both climate change and how to communicate online for the ad industry. And last, I would say for civil society, I think we need accountability for agencies that work with fossil fuels. And that comes through better measurement of the impact that they have. So, you know, they need to measure their work with fossil fuel companies as part of their net zero targets. And we also need them to take responsibility for their actions in the context of the many, many legal actions that are underway against fossil fuel companies for misinformation, because it was the agencies writing the lies, not the fossil fuel companies themselves were alone.
Well, I was thinking that maybe we can make 1-2 minutes for final considerations and then open to questions. But I want to ask Aditi one more thing about, I think another central issue for the debate is the concentration of advertising services, especially programmatic advertising, in just one ad tech, Alphabet, I think. How this scenario is bad and dangerous for the integrity of information, and what possibilities exist to deal with this issue?
Yeah, so we've talked about how advertisers don't have control over their ad budgets. We've talked about how news publishers don't have an editorial control over their ad placements. And another thing that I mentioned earlier was that the middlemen in the ad tech ecosystem have really created a two-side industry, and so they, own the same company that's working with an advertiser, the same company that's working with a publisher. And so they've really created a monopoly within the industry. And so at Check My Ads, we often advocate for healthier markets and competition because we can't let these monopolies control multiple points of the digital advertising ecosystem of the supply chain, because it ultimately allows them to determine how climate disinformation is monetized. And we've already seen a number of countries take up competition proposals. We've seen it in the US, in the EU, in India. And really it is for the benefit of advertisers, for the benefit of consumers, for small businesses, for journalists, to create healthier markets in which we have more transparency, we have more players in the ecosystem, so that we really can we can bring that as a whole to ad tech.
So we start with Charlotte. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, just one thing to add. Information integrity is not possible without free, independent, and pluralistic media. And that means, media freedom, and it means media viability. And we've heard in several different panels about the financial constraints and the demise of media entities in the current information landscape. And I just wanted to follow on one point that Aditi made, which is in the global principles. Well, first of all, free, independent, and pluralistic media is one of our principles, but one of the recommendations we make to advertisers is to, as they're going about demanding data and looking at where their ad dollars are going and which, websites they're funding, to prioritize public interest media and reliable information, right? So it's not just that they're not funding disinformation, it's that they're actively helping to elevate reliable sources of information, which is a fundamental part of freedom of expression, right? Giving people the right not only to express themselves, but to access information, to access ideas and information of all kinds. So I think it's kind of a win-win.
So I think my final thought is that we need to understand who benefits when people lie about climate change. And that is primarily fossil fuel polluters who are responsible for the vast majority of climate change. Also agribusiness, also plastics companies. There are many companies involved, but at the centerpiece is fossil fuel companies. It's the industry that is most responsible for the problem, which means they're most responsible for the misinformation. And I think if we work to isolate and remove the influence of fossil fuel companies within our media ecosystem, within creative companies, within institutions of all kinds, it'll be a much clearer path towards both high integrity information around climate change and climate action.
So I just wanted to build on 2 points. The first of which is the point that Charlotte made about advertisers investing in quality news. again, advertiser, it makes business sense for advertisers to invest in quality news and media that speaks to everybody. And so finding those areas where there's mutual benefit is going to be really important in building allyship. The other thing is that the advertisers are the main customers of the platforms. You know, Mark Zuckerberg is where he is because of advertisers. And so the advertisers are not happy with the services that they're getting from the platforms. They are certainly not happy with the transparency of those services. They're not happy with what they're appearing next to. Talked about our, you know, all of these brands who've done so much work on sustainability and mitigating climate impacts, and then for their ads to be served on climate denial videos is pretty galling for them. So I think finding areas of mutual benefit like that and building allyship there is where we'll go. And I know we haven't talked about content and greenwash, but you know, I think there's also opportunities there for advertisers to use their incredible communication skills to forward really good information and to help all of us in this room get our messages out there and going much further. Thanks.
I think Aditi also has to make 2 minutes final considerations, right?
Yeah, one thing I just want to come back to that I think was touched upon a lot today is that climate disinformation delays action on climate policy. And by helping to monetize this content, ad tech plays a major role in helping climate disinformation flourish and also legitimizing these claims. And I think also to Harriet's point, advertisers should be able to make decisions based off of fact, off of their business values, off of transparency. And so I think we really need more education and awareness about how the ad tech industry operates, and kind of, you know, more opacity or more transparency within the ad tech ecosystem, and really the issues within the supply chain. And I think that, you know, we've seen policy proposals, like I mentioned, in many countries, and you know, we're hoping to continue to see more of that in the future.
Much. I'm going to switch to Portuguese right now. I think people may ask question in Portuguese. So does anyone? Yep.
Posso começar?
Here. Hi. My name is Inaya. I work at the Internet Lab. I wanted to ask about ads done by the government. We know that the government in Brazil is an important actor in terms of ad generation in social networks, and that is conflicting because on one hand we know that the government needs to be where people are, and on the other hand they end up putting money into this incredibly opaque system of advertising. I wanted to know if you have an opinion on this, and if in your countries of origins this is also a reality. Thank you.
Normally formulate my question in Portuguese, but since most panelists, to exception of Humberto, are English speakers, so I prefer to formulate in English. It is about the liability of platforms for illegal content when this illegal content is contained in advertisements that they disseminate in their networks. The Brazilian Supreme Court is about to judge on the constitutionality of a disposition of the Brazilian Internet Civil Rights Act that sort of creates an immunity for user-generated content for platforms. And it says basically that platforms are only liable if they fail to act after a judicial order of removal. And then in this judgment, the Office of the Attorney General of the Union, where I work, has submitted a memorial defending, among other things, that platforms should be liable when the content that they disseminate, it's advertisement content. That is to say, when they receive money for disseminating that content, they are sort of partners. And so the liability regime should be like a strict liability. That is to say, they don't need to wait for a judicial order or an extrajudicial order of removal. And this position has been criticized, basically by platforms themselves, as being a sort of existential threat for these business models. So my question would be, how exaggerated is this critic, if it's an exaggeration at all? How do you see this argument? Thank you.
Who wants to start? Harriet, okay.
I can give it a go. So I will start actually with the point about platforms. It is extremely possible to change a platform's kind of business model. It's just happened, it may be happening in the EU and UK right now, where actually Meta has, due to kind of a recent court challenge, Meta has flipped its business model for some users for being from an ad-based model to a subscription-based model, for example. And that is for users that don't want their personal data processed and who have successfully argued that there should be different models available. I understand that in some parts of, particularly remote Brazil, where some of the platforms are essentially internet infrastructure, it can feel, concerning that these threats. But I would also ask everyone to have a look at the Union of Concerned Scientists, Disinformation Playbook, and all of these tactics that are used. These are narratives that are created in order to create uncertainty and risk, and are themselves worthy of interrogation. So I would definitely, have a think about that. And there is way more that these platforms can do. They are very, very new in terms of, I think regulation and their approaches to corporate social responsibility are very, very nascent, and often don't take into account their major impacts. And we're seeing coming through the EU something called the CSRD, which looks at contains in it a concept called double materiality, and that will much broaden the impacts that these platforms have to think about. So I would definitely be looking to the EU as well to see how they respond to these pieces of legislation. And to the point over here, which I think was about government spending. I'd love the Brazilian government's advertising department to come and talk to us, because we've got lots of experience with helping organisations to actually drive transparency through the way that they're placing their advertising, and to do it with human rights and sustainability in mind. It is very, very possible. We know that both brands and other governments do this regularly. So it is possible to spend your advertising money in a way that actually promotes information integrity, instead of just pouring it into a black box, as some are doing at the moment.
Does anyone want to respond?
Just to add to what Harriet just said, yeah, I think our recommendations around transparency and advertising aren't just for big brands, right? That's been the focus of what we've talked about today, but we're in this information ecosystem where, pretty much every institution, every organization, does ad spend in the digital space. And so, and that's just what you have to do to be relevant. So I think all of our recommendations could certainly be harnessed and taken up by any organization looking to promote information integrity and promote and save money, right? So, I think, yeah, absolutely, it applies to everyone.
And just to also answer the question about platforms, I think we are, like you asked, we are seeing issues on the platforms with a lot of AI-generated content, with made for advertising, which is low-quality content. But I think, the issue really is the monetization of this content. I think there's a statistic for every $1 of ad spend, only 39 cents of that actually makes it to quality content. A lot of that is ending up on next to other content, like AI-generated content. And so that also fuels the spread of this on platforms, and I think that that's also a really big issue.
I think we have time to just one more question, a short question, or two short questions. Américo, you can go.
Obrigado pelo excelente painel. Obrigado, Humberto, pelo excelente.
Thank you so much for the panel. Thank you so much, Humberto, for the conduction. Two quick questions. One is that I'm sure that you have been following. Last week, the Minister of Environment in Brazil, Marina Silva, has launched an idea that is called global ethical balance, which is of the global stocktake mirroring of the NDCs, but looking through the perspective of ethics, trying to promote a global debate on ethics in regards to climate change. The letter of André do Lago is talking about a work together with everyone talking about climate change. So I would like to know if, in your opinion, the debate on ethics can contribute to transform the industry of communication, of advertisement, of accountability, because you have brought to the conversation of transparency and accountability. But I would like to know your opinion regarding ethics, and if this global debate on ethics can contribute to all of the transformation that you are looking for, because at the end of the day, it's about the ethics in this industry. And also know about your experience with COP. So countries that receive the COP itself, if that contributes or not with the industry of communication, if you have any reference, or if this has nothing to do with anything. Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to speak in English.
I am at Digital Action, and I have one kind of like reflection question to ask, and this comes to how can we like build like alliances with advertisers? How can we like move forward in a context where we are like seeing big tech that are like filing lawsuits against advertisers, and while we are also like seeing, for example, the World Federation of Advertising dismantling the such like initiatives as the Global Alliance for Responsible Media to ensure digital safety. And when we are also like seeing kind of like a backlash of governments also like trying to retract on policies around transparency, when we are seeing also like this big collaboration between governments and techno oligarchs and big tech, and if that is somehow like installating kind of like a fear of like acting, of like paralyzing, because even if you're like trying to do something, if you're trying to create a solidarity and a network, you see like the big power of governments and big tech like trying to basically reduce the space of doing something. So basically what's in this context being left, and how, what are like the elements that we can do to move forward? Thank you.
Try to answer quickly. I will try to answer quickly. I think the ethical question is very important. Fossil fuel companies have declared to investors that they plan to burn more coal, oil, and gas than the planet can sustain. They have told in public that they are planning to destroy the world. That is not ethical. And it is not ethical to help those companies do it. It is just a very fundamental question. And we often get the question at Clean Creatives that says, if we don't work with fossil fuel companies, well, then I won't have to work. What if I don't have to work then with this other company or plastics or something? Well, if you do work with fossil fuel companies, who won't you work with? There's a slippery slope that moves in the other direction where you open the door to doing anything. And so I think the ethical question is very fundamental to any business, and this is the right line to draw. And in terms of the companies that are moving away from their climate targets right now, the urgency for climate action does not come from governments, it does not come from scientists, it comes from the planet. And the planet is getting hotter than it ever has been. And it will have effects on us, it's having effects on people in this room, and the companies that step away from their climate goals are going to suffer in the future. And I think we have to keep pointing out that in 2019, there was the world's biggest climate march, the climate strikes, and it was the biggest moment of climate mobilization in human history. The president in the United States was Donald Trump when that happened. When governments don't act on climate change, civil society interest in climate action goes up, not down. And there will be another moment where civil society comes together in a massive global way to demand action from corporates, from corporate leaders, from governments, and the companies that act now to set up their standards are going to be ahead rather than behind. So I think we have to keep coming back to that point. The fundamentals of this problem have not changed. And that's what needs to drive the coordination we do.
No? Does anyone? Harriet? Yeah.
Ooh, sorry. Okay, so I'm going to take a big deep breath. I know I've answered lots of these questions from a very kind of capitalist perspective, and to answer the ethics question over here, which is that, you know, companies, they care a lot about money. They're also made up of individuals who care a lot about the things that you've described. And, you know, I talk every day to frustrated individuals who are trying to make change happen from within. And I deliberately use these very money-orientated arguments because that's how we talk to the money people and the people with power to make the change. But, you know, everyone who works in these organizations is like you or I, and they're worried. And then on the lawsuit side of things, look, this isn't going away. This desire to reach everybody with advertising, which is the inclusivity part, to make sure that we do it effectively and to do it safely, because to that point, these companies are made up of individuals. That is also not going away. And whilst GARM, may have folded, people are still asking the same questions. These issues are still really important for these brands, and not just for the money reasons that I've described, but also for the human reasons that I've just described. So, it's not, this conversation isn't going away because there's a couple of lawsuits going on, and that side is not the only side that's filing lawsuits, and consumers care. So, don't worry.
I think your question on on regulation, on lawsuits, I can speak from the US perspective because that's where I'm based. I think policymakers are, in the US, I think are slowly starting to really understand the harms of the ad tech industry. And I think something that has helped is also making these harms really tangible. I think last year there was a lawsuit that was brought by the Department of Justice to Google for their anti-competitive actions within ad tech. There was just legislation reintroduced last week to prevent conflict of interest in the ad tech industry. And I think policymakers are really starting to understand there are real tangible harms for small businesses. They're not able to keep their profits because ad tech is taking so much of them. There are harms to journalism. And so I think that the conversation has been started, and I think it needs to continue to happen to really unveil exactly what's going on in the ad tech industry. And I think that policymakers are also starting to push back.
Thanks, and not to repeat Harriet, but in fact, she made the point that I was hoping to make about individuals. And actually, when we launched the Global Principles last year, someone asked the Secretary General as he was speaking to the media, well, how are you going to get anyone in these companies, tech companies or otherwise, to care about this, right? You don't have accountability, these are recommendations. And he said, these companies are made up of people, and these people are parents, they're citizens, they're human beings. And he said, I know that they will want to do the right thing. And I think that is definitely something that we have to hold on to. And just to Duncan's point about how, people really do act when times are hardest, if you'll indulge me in a moment of cliche, in recent times, a lot of us have been reminding ourselves of the words of Martin Luther King Jr. And one of his quotes that I go to on an almost daily basis is that, only when it's darkest can you see the stars. And I think it's at times like these that you really do start to see those stars shine. And those stars are all of us and all those people that we're hoping to reach. So thanks.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Charlotte, Aditi, Harriet, and Duncan. Congratulations to Fala, CAAD, and Conscious Advertising Network for organizing this event. And that's it. And thank you, everyone, for understanding my perfect English. That's it.
Olá.
I would like to call you for a break. And if we can, we have some photos for the event already available on Flickr. You can access them through this QR code. and we will be back in 15 minutes at 5 to 5. Thank you. Hello, good afternoon. Once again, I want to request that you take your seats. I would like to ask for the panel on lives at risk, the impact of disinformation in the city, rural areas, and the forest. I'd like to call on Juliana Mori, co-founder and editorial director of Info Amazonia. Carla Braga, co-founder and project director at Cojovem. Erisvan Guajajara, journalist and activist, founder of Coletivo Mídia Indígena. Eliesio Marubo, lawyer, activist, and legal counsel at the Union of Indigenous Peoples of the Javari Valley, Univaja. And Marcos Wesley, co-founder of Tapajós, in fact. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you all this afternoon. After so many interesting discussions since this morning, we close with this panel. Let me introduce myself. My name is Juliana Mori. I am the co-founder and editorial director of Info Amazon, which is a journalistic vehicle using data and reports to bring information that is qualified to the public debate on issues of social environmental issues in the Amazon states. About 4 years ago, we helped create with Fala the project Lies Have a Price, which aims to describe the damages done to indigenous communities. We documented the attacks and hatred speech against environmental defenders, which is the topic of our panel. We also work on combating disinformation, qualifying journalists in the region, and we also work in network with local vehicles in the Amazon to strengthen the journalistic ecosystem and the production of integral information. Information is not just an abstract concept. It has consequences in the real world for individuals and communities. As it was mentioned here this morning by Leticia and João Guilherme, climate information here in Brazil is just an issue of level of emission or carbon or NDCs. We're mainly talking about a territorial dispute, land dispute, the attempt to have domain over traditional community spaces in our country and in the Amazon specifically. So let us hear from the people which are directly affected by what's happening. This needs to be at the heart of our discussion. That's why this table brings these four members of the community as they face this disinformation in the territories, whether they are in the city, in the rural areas, or in the forest. So let us hear directly from them on their connection to the topic. I'm going to ask each one of you to introduce yourself, first of all, answering as to what are the most significant impacts of the threats to the information in your territories. I had an order which is different to the chair, so let's just leave it as is so I don't get lost. I'm going to ask Elias, Carla, Rizwan, and Marcos. I think there's a microphone there. Hi. My name is Elias Marub. I believe my introduction was done very nicely. I am from a region called Javari Valley in the northern part of the Amazon state. And I am going to move on to answer the question that was posed. I wanted to say the following. It is undeniable as to how important the environment is, climate, the importance of natural elements for humanity, and the importance of the protected land in favor of humanity as well. But we cannot stop from considering that the world is divided into one element does not recognize that importance, and the other is in fact acknowledging and doing their homework in the sense of making the lands to be protected for the people to live in the Amazon world, also to be protected in that context. We don't have a way to dissociate people from the environment. In my region, which is a region that was well known in 2022, and sometimes I don't like to talk about it because it was really traumatic on my life in particular. From 2022, there was a dramatic change in the Brazilian Amazon when it comes to environmental issues. I come from a region where there's organized crime, the omission of authority, the political world dialogues with the crime, and that makes it so that in some ways there was a denial, a deliberate denial of the importance of the environmental issue on that which we had been talking about globally. The result of that is that very dramatically 5 people who were threatened, 3 out of those 5 people were killed. One was killed together with the last one who was dead because he was there. So out of 5 people under threat, only 2 people survived. And unfortunately, I am one of those people. And I continue defending my territory. I continue to defend the environment and my people, making people understand why it's important to tell the real story. But it's not the real story brought from the theories that you might have read, that truth that was sort of pushed through. It's actually what we see in the practice, because the concept of truth is still being debated. Today, the Supreme Court is deciding on an incredibly important topic for the country based on the understanding of what truth is, what actually happened. People in Brazil, in the US, in Europe have denied that which we as a society have witnessed. And naturally, that denial generates much biases for our society. When we don't recognize a state, altered elements, naturally I'm talking from the perspective of the environment and climate and social interest, are in fact changed. When we don't recognize that, the impact doesn't just fall on us who live there, it falls on you as well. How you live in the cities, whether you have food. Everyone here knows, I'm sure, that the Amazon provides a service as a climate regulator specifically on rain, and also for the production of food. We don't have a steak in the fridge out of nowhere that comes from somewhere, fruit and so forth. So in some way that has an impact on the context in which you live. The need, we need to have a deep reflection on the sense, on the idea behind the truth in the cities and how that impacts our lives. I have an example here. I am a victim of disinformation, of lies, and many other things. And I don't know how long I could have to prove the need to continue or not where I am and with what I'm doing. We need to reflect deeply on what we want for the future and how, as threatened people, are going to place ourselves in this scenario. Thank you. Carla, please. I had prepared a few slides. I'm not sure if it will be possible to show them. We really had a great challenge, which is to talk about our stories as defenders, which is something quite deep, and we talk in such an intense way that I needed to bring some slides, but perhaps they're not there. One moment, please. Okay. So let me take advantage of this moment to introduce myself. I'm Carla Braga, co-founder of the COJovem Project for Sustainable Development. I am an environmental engineer. I'm a researcher. I went to work in advocacy, and today I am strengthened out of violence, the violence that I suffered. This is the presentation of our colleague. Mine is the other. Let me start. I think I can use the slides from my phone, and as they show up, I can share them with you. Basically, why did I start working on advocacy? I like telling my story to illustrate this point. In the legal Amazon, disinformation is not an issue of strengthening lies or truth. It is an issue that is much more complex, directly related to an economic model and a territorial model that we have, and it makes it so that we export our richness as we socialize our miseries. So the context of disinformation in the Amazon is linked to the strengthening of that segment, of the perpetuation of models that increasingly export our richness and socialize our miseries. We discovered this at the COJovem Institute because we produce survey studies, and they are directed to the youth and related issues. I have here data from 3 items of research where we discovered, as we surveyed more than 200 information divulged during the electoral period of 2022, but also during 2023, that the mainly responsible people for spreading misinformation are NGOs of the far right and political personas, as well as far-right politicians who are linked to the social economical interest of our area, and also media channels that are financed by those politicians. And there we arrived at a profile as to who propagates misinformation in the Amazon. Most of them are men, they're white, linked to far-right political parties, PR, Union Brazil, and some of these politicians own media. This is a large problem we have in the Amazon area when we talk about spreading of information, because if they own media, they bring information that, of course, leads to benefits for them. The disinformation, the environmental disinformation in the Amazon is associated to the territorial development model, and it responds to economic interest and political interest, and they vary according to each territory.
So for us, I brought here three examples, one the Amazon, one Mato Grosso, and one Pará state. In the Amazon region, we have an ecosystem of NGOs that are really strengthened. So the misinformation that takes place there is very directed to talk badly about the NGOs, to try to talk badly about the settlements of the movement of the people that don't have lands, and directed to Marina Silva. But in the Mato Grosso, since I'm going to focus in my state, which is the state of Pará, where we found that the majority of the misinformation is more interested to the agro business. The Pará state has um, a huge territory. So in this model of misinformation, it's related to the people of MST to help in the agribusiness, and the speeches are hatred speeches to delegitimize what I have been working with, which is the international advocacy. I was always focused in the state of Pará, talking about the environmental legislation, trying to help in the crisis of the youth. I started suffering many attacks of misinformation, and they varied from the creation of fake profiles and dating websites where they just used my picture in a bad way, and they wanted to delegitimize women, especially to creating fake news about them. So this all generated a context that was really helpful, and that helped in the leadership so that I could leave the scene because of the threats, but also of my mental health. There is no way that we can resist to this environment when our image and who we are is being completely misused. So we started a strategy to have other leaders, especially youth, for us to be able to strengthen debates about the environment, about youth and climate that goes against the agribusiness nowadays. And I'm saying all of this, and I only have 10 seconds now, but to talk about the fact that the misinformation of the legal Amazon goes hand in hand with the segment that is late. It's not only based in truth or lies, but sometimes he wants to misuse the information so that we can have adversities instead of consensus, to generate an idea that it's impossible to act. So it's impossible to do the agrarian reform in the Amazon region. It's impossible for us to talk about this development where we have people in the center. It's impossible for us to think about construction of anything that is in the year of COP30 without deforesting and to put residues in the community. So it's impossible to have environmental racism problems. So because this is extremely institutionalized, and my time is up, so I'm going to stop here, but I'm going to pass the floor to my friend Livania so that we can deepen our conversation. Thank you so much. Okay, so I stopped in the other one where there was the other slide. Okay, you can revert. So, it is Mango Jajara. I am from the indigenous tribe, and we have been seeing a lot of misinformation. For 50 years, indigenous people, we have been suffering an unfair fight in the agrarian reform, and we are surviving for those who are deforesting, and now we're seeing a new story and a rediscovering the world, and we have the opportunity to show our protagonism, our narratives, and our stories. And with that, we have been betting in different strategies to combat this misinformation so that we can reach other bubbles and other spaces. Our collectives are going to launch the indigenous Brazil, the demarked settlements. Our idea is that we can bring to the world the idea saying that the protecting the indigenous people is protecting Brazil when the territories are respected. The rivers continue running, the animals find their resources and life quality. There's an improvement in their lives, and the Brazil that respects its own essence and culture and future. This campaign has the notion of improving the indigenous demarcation of lands and to find positive space for these indigenous populations. When the population has this consciousness, they are able to change. The Terra Livre camp is the one that is going to have 10,000 people there, and we're going to fight for our land. We're going to do our best to be able to reach for the population. We're going to work with campaigns and strategies at a social level and the media to help in the focus in the social media. We're going to help in the international level, and we're going to have help also from the schools. We're going to find a way so that we can transform the indigenous people, especially in the schools, with stereotypes that we want to remove from the schools and to have apps showing real-time information. So the idea is to pop the bubble, and in here we are important we find it important for us to change the climate problems and the cultural changes that what we want with this campaign is to show the details of life, and we are looking for partners to try to overcome this. There are people that can help us with this transformation of the people. In this campaign of the marked lands is going to be an important step to help in the indigenous populations and to have an international notion in the world. This campaign is to mobilize during the Terra Livre program. We're going to count with different artists that support us. They are partners of ours to fight with us. And we have talked to Anita, that was a huge partner of ours, Maria Gadu, and many of them, 17 of them are confirmed. We are going to record with them, and then we're going to go to Rio de Janeiro. So there are 25 artists in total that are going to participate voluntarily with us because they are going to also help us with the campaigns. Each one of them are going to record with this t-shirts, and we're going to work with the dissemination of information in radio, TV, because we're going to have also Brasilia, and the airports to show the work that we do, and we want this content to spread itself more and more in the social media. And that is going to be indicated so that we can work with this process. The idea that we have with this process is to really be able to reach other bubbles. So in other bubbles of discussions, we can have more richness and for us to continue ourselves in the indigenous territories. So we have different communicators in the indigenous community that is divided by regions, by states, and we need to act together for these leaders to continue disseminating contents. So the first encounter that they're going to have, they're going to be together, and our team is going to be ready to contact everyone, and the indigenous media is communicating our future generations, and my time right now is up. So sorry about that. I think Wesley is going to speak as well. I just wanted to ask a question. What is the importance of this campaign for us to connect this campaign with the indigenous movement? We have had many debates, and we have taken this movement forward to many territories. Anita has been a godmother of our movement and has helped us in Belém. She has committed with us. She has spread the word in her networks. So that is very important that they do that. And if there is the need for them to do that, and they are suffering persecution and criminalization because many of them do fake news. So when we get out of this bubble, we need to reach other spaces. We are able to reach other goals because we are protecting the indigenous territory. And the leadership is that they are speaking too fast. Sorry, the interpretation apologizes. They are planting many fruit trees, and they are showing that the indigenous populations are doing their part for the planet. So first of all, I am a communicator of the different lands. I wanted to open the ears for listening. So I'm going to start my speech saying that I'm very emotional to be here. And during my trajectory, I would like to highlight for the people that are here that we are in the face of the most important popular educators that are here with us. I'm very honored to see you here, João. And I'm saying this because we don't know where we are going when we don't know where we came from. I'm from Anamaraí, from a riparian culture, and we have one of the most beautiful landscapes on Brazil. And please visit us. And I am the grandson of two leaders of my indigenous people, and we have been acting in several moments, in several phases of my life, going forward in this context. And the region of the Low Amazon is an area for several projects of great impact. It's going beyond the agribusiness from our business that we are living since the 2000, and that in a way has been helping us bring this impact to my personal life, because that is something that we need to go through every single day. And for my family, I have people in my room, in my at home with guns, and I could have left this pathway throughout my life, and I had many opportunities for entering this life, but I was able to understand that I needed to continue that pathway, especially that is something, and I've been educated for doing that. And I can recognize that role. And in 2020, there is Tapajós, indeed, which is a vehicle that is not collective, that is an alternative one. and that Carla has brought this conversation forward, and the most beautiful lands are in my land. We have been in this context of denouncement, of sub-notifications of cases of COVID, and we could not repercute what was happening in the territories because although we were having the pandemic, the debates of the people in the region about the hydroways continued, but they were not advancing the way they should. So the animals were going through in our region, and we were not able to denounce that. So the Tapajós regions was something that we started thinking about this channel of social movement and of everything that could impact us in the social environmental work. So that has the presence of a lawyer, of a fake lawyer in the internet that was acting in the region. And due to these threats on us, they had people of the team that suffered attempts, physical attempts. There was a reporter that she was stabbed in front of our institution. She suffered physical aggression as well, leaving the institute, and her tire was broken, was flattened, and at the end, during the collective, she wanted to have there were heads of cats that were put in the backyard of people to threaten them. So because of being the leader of that, that is something that created a huge problem. And we entered in the defenders of the indigenous people, and I cannot trust the state's police, and I refuse to be part of it. So there is this problem now. I don't live in my region anymore because of that, but we continue trying. It was more than 4 years of therapy to be able to be here without crying. Sometimes I feel some discomfort, but I think it's necessary to continue fighting. Okay, so we have been hearing different speeches about threats, physical threats, death threats, and so many issues and that you have been facing, and delegitimization, criminalization, culture, and so on. So there are different threats that you all go through in the territory, and I think that you have also talked about not accepting the protection and having to leave the society and having to go somewhere else. Kala has also talked about entering the international advocacy as a way to resist the threats and the delegitimization that she was going through. I would like to start with you, Marcos. But thinking about everyone else, what is the support that is necessary to resist and to create this resistance?
Throughout this last 5 years, we had support that were and are essential until today. But even with that, we have to be careful. In 2022, after what happened with the car, we managed to get a partner to uh, hire the car, but there was some other issues. So we managed to get a van with one of our partners who was working in the region. He had a van that he was using, and we borrowed it And we started getting messages they started saying that we had actually used resources incorrectly, and that had a great repercussion. There were memes and jokes on Instagram and Facebook from the far right making fun of that. It is essential. We had much support from people. That's why I say that it's absolutely important for everyone to know their bases and our bases and territories, to understand their context. We had visits throughout these 5 years that were exceptional to understand our reality. I won't mention everyone who gave us emergency support, but there were many. And that helped us from when the stabbing took place. With the journalist, no one wanted to go back home because everyone was really taken aback. What happened to her could happen to any of us who were there. So we got a partner who in 2 hours provided resources to find hotel rooms for everyone, and also for everyone to leave that area. That was absolutely essential. That could have happened through programs that it would have demanded a lot longer. So the resources, that emergency support that some organizations have, became absolutely essential, and we still continue. We sort of depend, or we rely on that. Sometimes we need psychiatrists, we need that sort of follow-up, or psychologists. We have expenses for that kind of therapy to have at least some quality of life to keep going with the work. We're running out of time, but you mentioned something in the morning. You were saying that you need national support. So if you'd like to complement there. Yes. When you were talking in the morning, you said that when you were threatened, you didn't have national support. Yes, that's right. Many organizations in the region received messages. Let us denounce Cargill, who is the main company that destroys our city. Yes, let's do that. Let's work on the project. Let's have a podcast and a project. Everyone in Tapajós was threatened, and the organization is there winning their international prizes without even thanking us when they go up to the stage. So that's the way it goes. We have those organizations that have incredible work with us. They know our story. They know our activity in the territory, and that's why they support us. But on the other hand, unfortunately, we also have other organizations that use us to find resources, and then they disappear. They say we have great work to show. The EU let us form a coalition to do that, and then that's it. Once the work is done, they don't even come to the territory. They hire or they send people. I'm not saying anything against the people that come, but they're sending people to Alter do Chão, which is a gorgeous area. But that's all we're good for, as a bridge. And at the end of the day, we're not even remembered. They don't even thank us for giving them our name. Eliesio, I'm going to ask the question now to you. What do you think is necessary as support for the resistance to disinformation or to those attacks? That needs to be, first of all, not only the responsibility of the organizations of the third sector or the social movements, it needs to be a priority of the cities, of the governments. He was mentioning precisely the absence of policies that could do that give that initial support. Thank goodness you had only small emotional problems and you didn't try to commit suicide. I had some people in my region some people who were under death threats, and we had information that they are paying more than $500,000 per head for my brother. But let's stop putting ourselves as victims. We've always played our role representing the territory, and we have taken responsibility for defending our territory. We know the price that we pay. People are not, in fact, making those efforts simply because it's nice to be an activist. It's because we feel it in our skin. We feel the pain of being alone. I know how alone I am on that battlefront. I know how much I've been through. Many emotional lows and fear and many other situations to be able to defend a point of view in which I believe. My decision, my way of life, and this is a traditional incumbents, this comes from other generations before me. This is to serve my people. That's what I do. That's my role. That's my function. I do it with great responsibility, even knowing that I have a high price to pay to do what I do, which is to defend my land responsibly. We need to have a commitment of society. Few have worried with who is at the front and have paid that price. That person is a person that I understand because I know exactly what they go through. There is a program for defenders. It actually doesn't exist. It doesn't matter if it's right or left. Government is government, and civil society is civil society. Nothing changes. The responsibility of looking after people who are at the battlefront, defending that which they believe, and a collective interest. We do this defense work when we counter damages to a territory and other situations. We take on this responsibility as a way of life, and generally, there is no public policy that helps us, and we need to have that. Few organizations of the civil society do, in fact, that support in practice, just like he had someone who helped with financial recourses for a specific situation. Without being forever, then they say that's it. And we end up receiving threats. In our case, we only go to the north if we are accompanied by the federal police. Here, we need to drive in a secure car with security. We give up our lives for doing what we believe in. I don't know how long I have, but I will do this until my last breath, and I will pay with my life because of what I believe. How those local experiences of facing threats and disinformation can be broadened effectively and connect with global discussions to promote significant change. I believe that the international framework is our ally. We don't have another legacy if not the fight. I see that when it comes to disinformation and when we think about how we can strengthen the debate for internet governance internationally, we have a gap. And I take this as a case study because I used to work with internet governance, and today I'm working more in international advocacy. But thinking about the forum of internet governance, there is no deliberation where civil society can bring their ideas and where we can move forward in a negotiation sphere through and the international sort of put pressure on the national. It's a work that we have done in COJOVing at the Triple C with mitigation work. So I see that there is an opportunity to create deliberation ecosystems where we can be heard But I also think that we have a creative component, which is the development of campaigns. I see that oftentimes the voices of the Amazon territories, even if they are consumed because it's cool to support someone from the Amazon, we also have difficulty in popping bubbles because they don't understand why the Amazon needs to be at the heart of the debate. People in Brazil, whether it's in the imaginary or anyone who is here, because without the Amazon, we don't have we have no way of continuing to keep going. So we need to make people understand that the Amazon needs to be at the heart of the debate and the discussion, and in consequence, us defenders need to have our body marked by everything that is around our existence as Amazonids. I see as a great opportunity to strengthen campaigns, leaving the national for the international so that we can pressure decision makers that sometimes are at the base. I saw this in the state of Pará. We ended up uh, we just had a situation where a legislation made uh, access to education for indigenous communities only online. The campaign became international, and the governor had to actually go back because we have a very strategic year with the COP happening in our state. So the international community pressures the national, and that leads to changes in the local for a development model that is at least committed to lives that reproduce their dreams in the Amazon territories. I think Carla was quite clear. We're really connected with this. When we talk about communication, when we talk about information, we want to go beyond barriers. We want to reach the international community, and then we can pop other bubbles so that this content can reach where we don't have reach. So that campaign ends up having a broader range when we do that. When we brought Anita to work with us and other artists, there were some other people from the House of Paper. This is a show on Netflix. Things became viral very quickly. They stepped back and they said, no, we have to find another strategy because that became quite viral internationally. We were with our friend from Santarém the other day. She created content in Portuguese, in Spanish, in French, in English, and she started spreading for the focal points that we have, and that became viral as well. It went viral. How does the government wish to have a COP facing indigenous people, hitting teachers? They're not respecting and defending the lives of the people. Going back to something else that I think is important, when we go to the indigenous territories, many of us who go there record content or a denouncement, and we go there, we film, and we go back to the cities and spread that content on social networks, and it becomes viral. We have to be very attentive of this. It's very good to go to the city, to the territory, but when you leave, they stay there. You go, they stay. How safe are they there? In Pará, there's a great leadership that faces a lot of threats. They've had their home invaded and their equipment stolen. So they suffer much threats. We have to think about strategies as to how we can guarantee the safety of those that we interview, especially local communities, indigenous peoples, because think we need to think about strategies to strengthen the safety of those people. We've had cases of interviewing people where we had to take them from the cities and from their territories and stay in the cities for a couple of months because the next day after we interviewed them, they went into their homes. They broke into their homes. Interpretation apologizes, but the speech is incredibly fast. So we need to think about strategies of communication. It's good to spread, but it's also good to think about who we're interviewing. We're talking about lives. Oftentimes we end up not thinking to what extent our interview can cause harm in that territory. I think we have a couple more minutes for questions. Hi, good afternoon. My name is Jessica Botelho. I am a CPA from the Audiovisual Center of the Amazon. I wrote my question so I don't take up too much time. And it could be for anyone on the panel. I wanted to share a reflection that I felt quite strongly in the workshops that we conducted through the CPA organization in partnership with other organizations, with defenders, environmental defenders, and community leadership. Using a pedagogy of a participatory nature, we have simple exercises that help map what is being twisted or silenced in our ecosystems of information. And we don't just talk about disinformation, we talk about the structural conditions that make certain truths become spread and become myths or narratives, and other stories become deleted. This has shown that informing is also caring, that spreading knowledge from the territory is a political act of protection and creation of worlds. From the cartography of vulnerability and forces, what emerges are networks, not just internet networks, but trust and memory networks. What I wish to ask is what kind of training strengthened the autonomy and the informational resilience of those who are at the front line in the defense of a territory? Going back to what Marcos mentioned, how do partnerships among local organizations can share resources and exchange information and knowledge? Any other questions before we answer? Hello, my name is William. I'm a journalist student. I work as press, and I wanted to know, to get some advice, how to act, how to become heard, how to deal with activism without being because the topic is on a high or fashionable. That support of artists, is it that important? And how that support won't be used by the artist simply to bring benefit to himself? To what extent does the support of artists really bring traction, not just to become visible, but what we see today is something that becomes viral overnight, and after a week it's forgotten. So to what extent an artist becoming involved is a good thing or can lead to the mitigation of a problem? Thank you.
Okay, so thank you so much for the question. We have been questioned about this. Many people think that we are here for the media, but we have been doing many agreements with these artists to try to talk to this for them to part as partners. They're donating their image for us, and they close these partnerships to help in an event whenever we have one. So this artist that we are able to talk to until today, they donate their image. And Anita is this example, like I've mentioned, with this food that was delivered for the communities. Club Toledo is also having a campaign made for people that do artisan work. So those artists that we're able to talk to constantly, we get their donation, and for each segment they contribute with different things like a PEB and so on. So like ATL that is happening right now, we always have this conversation, and I like to leave it really clear because they want to donate their image. They want to ask how they can contribute with us. And they say this all the time. So besides donating their image, they say what they want, what they can do. And so it can be helping with food in the territory, it can be with the authority. So they have followed our public hearings, they have been in the public debates. So it's always good to have their presence. They are always there trying to help us in the indigenous causes. Jessica, I have a case study that I find interesting that happened in 2022 at the year of elections of COVID-19, that in the territory of the Amazon region, we were really vulnerable for the spread of information. So with an institute, CoJovem, we were able to do the selection of 80 students from the state of Pará, form this youth in the digital education, and approved the advocacy. And at the end of each one of this, we had the challenge. This youth would receive a mediatic education and then a challenge of sharing this with the community or of sharing that online. Since we were at a moment of pandemic, we didn't want to incentivize anyone in a different way. So in this context, they are with access to the internet, and they were choosing how they could do this with the communities and the leaders. So people were in indigenous communities, riparian communities with this information. And this generated an Instagram that was open for this youth where they posted their videos to combat that in the territory. So I think that this was a very nice example where we were able to pop some bubbles and justify that with people that are there and for people to understand what we're talking about. So in CPA, people do that really well, very professional. And I really believe us joining all of these methodologies and being able to have a wave of cooperation of our institutions that are resisting in our territory and that already communicate and that already strengthen our word and makes things happen. Okay, so I think it's fundamental to have all of this flow of information, but it's really important as well for us to expand even more the debate to not only be virtual in the territories, especially in the territories that we know that don't have access to internet. And this can happen in several ways. Being in the construction of charters, of different types of maps to expand the community radios in the communities. We have many of them that sometimes can be deactivated by the simple fact that they can propagate this energy of where the headquarter is. So it's really important for us to look at these different platforms in the territory. So 120 in energy, people are not, and they can invest that. So by experience, I see that there is a lack of vaccination in a specific territory in Santarém. We went to the community to try to understand what happened, and we saw that a lot of this part of the vaccination was due to the whole negationism of the vaccination. So we have done an inform that already exists in Tapajós, which is Curupira, and we have produced that in the territory with the narrative to vaccinate, and we were able to make the children be vaccinated again so that we could provoke the parents about that. So on how to listen and how to be heard, because it's on a hype or not, it's really simple. We just need to tell the stories of people around us, because there are many people that do this activism and that don't appear in the social media. So the same repercussion of what is going to happen throughout what has been exposed, I would like to remember one phrase that was given to me, and that was a great inspiration, and that had its martyr in 1993, which was Margarida Maria Alves from the interior of Paraíba region. Her last speech, it's better to fight alone with instead of fighting for hunger. So we're going to always tell the stories of people that are around us, that do very important and amazing things, and that people don't have any dimension of what they do. Let me just leave a final message, because while we were speaking, there was another opportunity that I've seen that is related to philanthropy and the strengthening of the area of communication and the mobilization of the baseline. There is this lack of communication, and when we act in the communication of baseline, we always have an action that is reactive to this hegemonic of integration and of funding, and that attend to interests to these types of investment. So for us to do this integration, we inevitably are going to help in this care with this communication of the organizations, because this saves lives and changes lives as well.
Tá, então é o último comentário, prometo. Mas é só para talvez
Just
avisá-los aos que
to
não
warn
sabem,
you, for those who
as
don't
pessoas da
know,
Amazônia também não são apenas rostinhos bonitos, como vocês podem ver aqui neste
they are not
nesse
only
painel,
just beautiful people that you can see here in the
mas
panel.
nós também somos pesquisadores, nós também somos mestres,
And we
também
are
somos
always we are
doutores,
also
também
researchers.
dedicamos a nossa vida
So,
para
and we
isso,
dedicate
muitas
our lives
vezes
for this.
sem que seja uma intenção
And
pessoal, no meu caso não foi uma decisão minha,
this
foi
was not
frustrada
my
pelos
own
companheiros do
decision
movimento social
and the full social movements.
mas é isso,
So that is
organizações de
it.
fora da
Like
Amazônia,
our
procurem Amazônia, chamam a
organizations,
gente para trabalhar com
we need
vocês,
to work with
percebam a
you
Amazônia a partir dos nossos olhares,
and
porque nós
notice
sim
that
estamos
from
aqui
this
todos os
look,
dias, nós não somos emprestados.
we are not dismissible,
Do sul
and
e do sudeste,
we are
para
from the
vivermos
south and
lá a
southeast.
vida
We
toda
live
vez,
there all our
todos os
lives.
dias na
We
nossa
dedicate
vida,
ourselves
até
more
a
and
vida, fazer
more
tudo isso que nós
to do
e
everything
fizemos
that we
isso
can.
todo o tempo, muitas
And we have
vezes
done this
sem
all
um
this time,
recurso, mas nós
even with little resources, but we
a
have
nossa
done that.
existência no
So
ativismo, na comunicação,
thank you
na
so much
mobilização, na
for the
incidência, na advocacy,
activism,
qualquer que
for the
seja
advocacy, and
o
all
maior
of
case
that,
de sucesso que a gente pode apresentar,
so
porque a
we can
organização
present
inteira
that to the
trabalhar e colaborar.
organization, and for us to act in that area, we need your help. Thank you. I would like to thank you all for being here. We are reaching the end. It was great hearing your experience. It was an informal moment of our event. I don't know if anyone would like to close. Thank you so much. Now I'd like to invite to the stage to do the speech, closing speech. And our panel, for our closing panel, I would like to call Thais Lazeri, who is the founder of Fala, and Jake Dubbins, the co-chair of Conscious Advertising Network.
I just wanted to say thank you to
Goes
basically lots of different people. I wanted to thank Fala, the co-organizers of this amazing conference, the work that they've put in to put everything together, the care, the intelligence, the incredible passion that these guys have. So Akiko and Rafa and Thais and their whole team have been incredible. And everybody, behind the scenes making this possible, the interpreters, the sound, the cameras, and everybody setting up the room and everybody involved. If I've missed anybody, I'm very sorry. So I wanted to say thank you to Fala. I wanted to say thank you to Climate Action Against Disinformation as well for being a great partner on this. Before we go into a few reflections on takeouts, I guess, from today, I wanted to reflect on what Imran said first of all, which was that freedoms can be destructive if deliberately misused, and freedom of speech can be exploited until no longer needed. I think the most powerful stuff that we've heard today is that suppression and confrontation of speech of everybody and people in this room. Adalto Suarez from UNESCO talked about the 749 attacks on journalists with 44 people being killed. Kate Sell and Christiana Luzcan talked about the direct threat to scientists and to researchers. And so the panel of Carlos, Kate, Christiana, Aneche, and Claudio, attribute to the work that you do, but also the risks that you are facing. And obviously that last panel there, incredibly powerful. And for Marcos, who actually in the morning made that intervention, talking and speaking very powerfully about having to move from his territory, from his land, from the threats that he faces. And that work, and not just the threats, I don't want to just dwell on the threats, I want to acknowledge the threats that were described on that panel from, and if I say the names wrong, I'm very, very sorry, but Rizvan, Carla, Eliesio, and Marcos. But the work, they've asked to join in the work of getting beyond the bubble, that work that is going into the research, the work going in communities to defend the land, but also to get out of the bubble and run those campaigns as well. So I just wanted to say, well, thank you, and a testament to the threats, but also the work that's going on. And then just finally, before we go with some takeouts, we've talked a lot today about, the economic interests of disinformation, and we've talked a lot about the economy of the internet, about the fossil fuel economy, agribusiness, and so on. And I just wanted to say that many would have you believe, and have us believe, that the economy is at a higher level than the earth, at the home in which we all share. But the economy is a wholly owned subsidiary of planet Earth. And all of us are nature before economic beings. And I just wanted to say that shared value of humility and respect that we all share before going into the reflection. So thank you to everybody, all the speakers that have been here and made the time, and thank you to you for joining.
Good evening. Thank you so much for staying today with us. I started by saying that what moves me for many years now are people. And I want to say that finishing with those stories, they're really those wake-up calls that we cannot forget. We cannot argue with disinformation looking at the screen or within universities when it places people at risk. Information needs to be looked at globally, nationally, and in a territorial framework. I think it's really important for us. Of course, I spent many years telling the stories that they told you themselves today, serving as a bridge, just a bridge for those stories to reach others. But we cannot naturalize what they go through or naturalize the fact that they use their own bodies as defense for a territory, for a cause. This really moves me. But above all, I think that today, and I thought I was on my own. I felt a sense of community today, that sense of belonging, of something that goes beyond each of us, that goes across borders, and that the indigenous peoples and the Quilombola communities know this very well. Borders are made up by white men. We need to think about a movement that goes beyond a city, a country. We have a challenge, and this is at a scale that tilts one way or the other. Someone put a seed here. We need to think about what we're going to do after this. I always say that we have a summit, right? But what's the result of that? Of bringing all of those people to Brasilia to discuss and to leave here full of ideas. We need to leave with ideas and put them into practice and think about how we can strengthen and how we can even, as some people said, put little pots so that they arrive at the territories, so that they get to different areas, so that people have a right to life and a right to quality information. I think that's what we're here for, with so many strong speeches, thinking from defenders to scientists to organization leadership that today have to protect their own lives to guarantee quality information, to guarantee that rights are preserved. That's what I bring away. That's what I take away. We will do a closing of our calls and what you brought. But I also wanted to leave my great thanks to each one of you for being here. And I really hope that the seeds continue to grow elsewhere.
Certainly some of the that sounded weird. Certainly some of the key commitments that have been that have been made, and some of the takeouts here. Sorry, but I'll read from my phone. But in the early part of the day, the Brazilian government representative, Nina Santos, the host of, and Brazil, the host of COP30, announced their commitment to prioritize information integrity at the upcoming climate summit at COP30, and to expand their efforts in leading the global initiative for information integrity on climate change. And the Brazilian chapter of that initiative will be launched tomorrow on the 26th of March. The European Union also warmly welcomed the groundbreaking global initiative, saying that they were very aligned and announced they are working through the necessary processes for official commitment and financial contributions. And the United Kingdom also reiterated their commitment as a founding member of the Global Initiative for Information Integrity on Climate Change. And then I'll pass to Thijs, and we'll sort of both go through some of the key outcomes and the pathways to ensure information integrity. And then we're going to open it up to the room as well to make any comments, see if we've got anything wrong, we've missed anything as well. So Thijs, over to you.
Obrigada.
We mirrored here some of the key messages that were brought in various ways as testimony from people who were with us. So I think we need to think about these public policies and about the role that the summit has within this journey. We need to think about transparency, accountability, and everything that we can do within the social media sector, technology, companies. We need to think about accountability. We cannot change the game without turning that key. And to guarantee that that information doesn't generate more influence, more power, and more resources for a whole productive chain.
So here we have information integrity as a foundational prerequisite. And pretty much everybody agreed that the information integrity is not only essential for robust climate action, but also for the protection of fundamental human rights, of democracy, and also for freedom of speech. There is also the crucial role of policymakers, some of whom were here today. So the summit firmly established the critical role of lawmakers in fostering transparency and accountability among media, social media, and technology companies, and emphasizing their responsibility to enact policies focused on protecting information integrity, individual rights, including the right to access information, and preventing the manipulation of public discourse through disinformation. And regulation measures can safeguard the digital public space and protect human rights and democratic processes. We've literally just heard about addressing the threats to climate defenders and the urgent need to protect environmental defenders, scientists, indigenous peoples, and journalists who are facing immense pressure and threats to due to the proliferation of disinformation, and also to support their work in both nationally and internationally. We've heard a lot about advertising today and the economy of the internet, and the advertising sector needs to step up to their responsibilities to demand transparency, to counter the financing disinformation and hate. Business models and economics of advertising is hugely challenging, and big tech, PR industries, and advertisers need to demand transparency so they can better understand and take responsibility for their supply chain and also chains. And also the fossil fuel sector, using that opaque advertising business model to protect their vested interests, agencies and enablers within that system need to step up. And then finally, COP30 is a global opportunity for action. The summit, and everybody speaking here, and again, I hope we're not getting this wrong, but it does present a global opportunity for proper multilateral cooperation on information integrity. The official outcome of the COP30 to explicitly acknowledge the threat to information integrity posed by a vested interest, including carbon-intensive sectors, and to clearly mandate the roles and responsibilities of both parties and information ecosystem actors, including big tech, media companies, and advertisers, in safeguarding climate information. So yeah, hopefully this summit has marked a significant step forward, and I hugely welcome the partnership of Fala and CAD.
Gente, é isso. Muito obrigada.
That's it. Thank you so much. We hope to see you very soon. Thank you once again for being here. We invite you all for a cocktail? Oh, a form before the cocktail. I think it's interesting. Many people came. We want to understand what worked, what didn't work. What are your suggestions? What can we do to improve? That's it. I always want to know what we can learn with what we did. So if you can please answer the 3 questions on the form, we will wait, and we will see you outside at the dinner. Thank you very much. Good evening.
São só 3 perguntinhas mesmo, então eu peço que vocês respondam, é super importante para
It's really important for us to hear.
Just 3 questions. You can say what you have done, what you can do best, what we can do worse. So after you answer, we're going to have a cocktail that is going to take place next to where the restaurant is. So I would like to invite you to please go down, eat some food, drink, and continue this network that we started today. So thank you so much for your presence.
Ai, a Lucida para eventos online gosta de